Good morning, everybody. It's always my pleasure to join you at the end of the month and be what they call in baseball the closer. If you've been watching that World Series, you know last night's game was one of the most exciting baseball games I've seen in a long time. And it got me to thinking how wonderful it's going to be when we're all able to get back together and fellowship and return to what we used to call normal and embrace the opportunity to be together. And just like a great team that we are, when that happens, our starting pitcher, Reverend Lisa, will get on the mound and continue to deliver us those spiritual ideas. And then our middle relievers, Reverend Paul and Reverend Amon, will come and embellish on those ideas. And then I'll get an opportunity to come to you in person and close out the game. And if we should have to go into extra innings, we'll call the big gun, Dr. Ronnie, to come and complete the message. But today we're going to tie up this message we've been hearing all month from Reverend Lisa, entitled Mine Is. And she makes reference to our text on how to use it. All month long, Reverend Lisa has baptized you in the waters of mind. She's opened us up to the ultimate potential of mind, how we can use it for the betterment of ourselves and the betterment of all humanity. She has made sure that we are aware that there is no separation between the mind of God and the mind of man. For there is truly only one mind. Some of you have become aware and others have been reminded that mind is a universal principle that created all things. It is the thing that became everything. We now know that the beginning of all things is mind, because everything begins with a thought. Just as the mind of God created the universal presence, the mind of man produces our individual and collective expressions. Just as there are no limits to the power of a universal mind, there are no limits to what we can accomplish when spiritually, mentally, and physically aligned with that which we call God. Universal mind in our mind works on the same principle of love and law. Universal mind must demonstrate using those principles of love and law. You see, the power has no choice in how it operates, but we get to choose how we use it after we master the method of its use, after we become aware of the thing itself, after we study the way it works. Then we'll understand what it does. Then we can acquire the knowledge and how to use it. I liken this thing, I'll give you a material example just to drive that point home. The Bugatti is the most expensive automobile in the world. $19 million after taxes. So we can read the brochure and learn about this thing itself. We can get an understanding of its capabilities. Then we can go to the owner's manual and comprehend the engineering of it and the way it works. Then we can marvel over all the extras and the bells and whistles as we take a look at what it does. But without a driver's license, without passing your spiritual exam, you lack the understanding of how to use it. You see, the goal of the Bugatti is just like the goal of the power of God. It's to maximize our performance and avoid accidents and fatal crashes. Our use of it depends on our perception of it, our belief in it, and our faith as it. Yes, we are it. But our humanness makes us forget or ignore our truth. Charles Fillmore says this. He says, man in the consciousness of the one mind has no sense of apartness. Through affirmation, he can attune himself to being, transmute his thoughts into ideas, and accomplish seemingly the impossible. You see, as offspring of the image and likeness of the one mind, we produce, we manifest the expressions of our life in the same sequence that creation unfolds. We must first awaken to a spiritual consciousness. Then we can develop an unwavering faith that allows us to activate our unlimited imagination. And through that imagination, we can express divine will and understanding and use the intuitive knowing and discernment in order to connect with that perfect idea of love and wisdom that gives birth to the Christ mind. Then we can rest in the ultimate confidence and trust of our spiritual truth. That's why Reverend Lisa told us we need to transform as Jacob transformed. We need to evolve beyond our animalistic nature. We need to allow our mental to reign superior over physical. The mind must enter into a higher state of consciousness. You see, our understanding must be illuminated. We must be able to climb those 12 steps of spiritual truth. Then our spiritual ideas become the seeds that bless our conditions and our circumstances. We realize our spiritual identity, that is our original inspiration. And we unite with the loving principles of the pure motives of God when we complete our spiritual journey. We have to train our conscious mind to think pure thoughts and see beyond appearances so we can have great expectations. Our elevated consciousness infuses the subconscious with ideas of unlimited possibilities that expel all negative impressions. And then the superconscious reveals that spiritual truth that activates the law that manifests the life that we desire. You see, this trinity of mind working in harmony brings into reality the unseen potential that is all-knowing, all-powerful, and eternally present. Reverend Lisa told us about the conscious mind, which announces what we want to be, the subconscious mind that reveals what we are, and the superconscious mind that declares what we can and should be. These three elements of mind comprise the workings of the one mind, the one power, and the one presence. I liken that power, that omniscience, that omnipotence, that omnipresence of God to electricity. This power produces things. It gives us access to the things based on our connection to it and our use of it. It doesn't know if it's cooking your food or electrocuting your body. But our knowledge of its principles and how we may apply them determines the effect that it has on our life. Ernest Holmes identifies the mind of God as infinite intelligence. How we use it can provide a blessing, or it can produce a curse. You see, it's a law that doesn't change. It gives us what we ask for in thought, speech, and action. It responds to the level of our consciousness. So when we activate our Christ mind, the experience is usually good. When we rely on our mortal mind, however, our material consciousness, that's when evil raises its ugly head. Our text, how to use it, tells us that sin and punishment, or righteousness and salvation, are logical outcomes in the universe relative to the thoughts that we project. You see, the secret of life, the answer to conflict can be found in our ability to control our thinking, our ability to bring our thoughts in harmony with the spiritual reality, not our human desires. Ernest Holmes tells us that thoughts should tend more and more towards an affirmative attitude of mind that is positive and stable. He says, spirit is already complete and perfect, but our charge is to recognize, unify, and realize it as ours to manifest. You see, wrong conditions can only exist if there is someone to experience them. We must consciously accept the good, which is our recognition. We must subconsciously empower its activity, which is our unification, and we must superconsciously direct its response and its purpose, which is our realization. You see, if we elevate the consciousness, the false conditions will disappear. New Thought metaphysicians have been telling people for hundreds of years that if you change your mind, you can change your life. Joel Osteen comes along and says it, and all of a sudden it becomes accepted by the masses. Ernest Holmes, Thomas Troward, Charles Fillmore, Mary Baker Eddy, Emerson, Quimby, and Fox gives us a scientific method to shift our consciousness, to bring a new desirable experience or a greater understanding of the existing condition. Ernest Holmes tells us that the one who wishes scientifically to work out his problems must daily take the time to meditate, mentally treat the condition, no matter what the apparent condition may be. It's a simple lesson in how to use the power of mind. Sit your butt down, be still, and know. 1 Timothy 4:15 tells us to meditate upon these things. Give thyself wholly to them, and thy profiting will appear. If we take time to just sit down and be still and give ourselves to the presence of God, the good things that we desire will manifest in our life. All we need to do is speak a word, believing without ceasing, until change takes place, until your vision becomes your reality. When you want to access the power of God within, when you seek to connect with the divine mind, we have to take a lesson from our ancestors and get down on our knees and pray. Meaning we have to humble ourselves, get our bloated nothingness out of the way, and declare that of yourself you can do nothing, but the Father within can do all things. Your spiritual mind treatment, your prayer of gratitude and thanksgiving is a divine entity working through the law of mind. It's a celestial force that is super consciously directed. Therefore, it must produce the result. Our connection with the mind of God, our ability to access and express the essence of God, comes through prayer. Prayer unites us with the spiritual realization we experienced in the past and what we will experience in the future. But prayer only operates in the now. As the preacher used to say at Miracle Baptist Church and New Hope Baptist Church when I was just a young lad, prayer changes things, but prayer does not change, cannot change, and will not change the infinite power of God, the law of God, or the mind of God. Prayer changes the mind of the one praying. Prayer doesn't change what we become, it changes our perception of what we are. It doesn't take us to a new place. It returns us to our original space. Our concept of a physical image is derived from a spiritual feeling that can only be accessed through prayer. Reverend Lisa tells us that after you master this spiritual understanding of Jacob, you have to adopt the faith of Jabez. Jabez is that awakening to the understanding that prayer, our inter-spiritual connecting with God, will deliver our earnest desires. when we eliminate evil thoughts, when we avoid negative experience, we develop an inner assurance that the answer to our prayers awaits our recognition, our unification, and realization of them. That the Christ mind is the mind that knows. What we recognize in consciousness and unite in spirit, that's what we realize in body. Welcoming the Christ mind is the ultimate goal, regardless of religion. We have to acknowledge the promise in the conscious mind, which is the first coming. We have to receive truth in the subconscious mind, which is the second coming. And the everlasting elevation to the superconscious mind is the ultimate eternal expression of what mind is. When we collectively ascend to the consciousness where we think the thoughts of angels, we will not only solve our personal issues, we'll be able to solve the world's dilemmas. You see, angels reveal words of truth. Our angels represents the imagining power of the mind that receives and reflects divine ideas into consciousness. I was reading a book that was written by one of our modern day mystics, visionaries, and scientists, Greg Braden. The book is called The Isaiah Effect. In this book, he shares an interesting perspective of how collective consciousness could put an end to wars, oppressions, pandemics, and mass suffering. He tells us through prayer and thinking thoughts of angels that we can change the conditions in our world. But in order to change those conditions, we must change the thinking that allowed them to be present in the first place. You see, most of us are not aware that our simple thoughts, our attitudes, our actions towards each other on a daily basis contribute to the collective belief that agrees to wars and suffering in the world. You see, the international conflicts couldn't exist without the petty conflicts that exist in our personal lives. The episodes of defending ourselves, taking advantage of others, cutting off people in traffic, all contributes greatly to worldly effects. You see, Mr. Braden studied quantum physics, which reminds us that these simple expressions of negativity can be magnified in other spaces and places. It makes little sense for us to practice this sort of behavior and then the next day attend a rally for world peace. He relates a story that he was involved in back in 1999. He says a person called in on a radio show and suggested having a prayer visual to pray for the demise of a leader of an oppressed foreign country. You see, that same consciousness that was praying for the demise of that leader of the foreign country, that's the same consciousness that extinguished Martin, Malcolm, and John. And as ridiculous as it may sound, there's somebody listening to me right now that had a similar thought when they heard Trump had COVID. You see, in the midst of our conflict, in the midst of our turmoil, when our ego and emotions get out of control, we lose our spiritual self. The thought of using prayer to impose your will is contrary to the purpose of prayer. Prayer transcends imposing our will on others. Prayer represents the opportunity to become more by bringing new possibilities into an existing situation. This is an example of how deeply embedded warlike thinking is in the culture of our society. What we forget, if there is no them versus us, there's only we. The only way we can make war obsolete, the only way we can cause pandemics to cease, the only way we can make racism a thing of the past is to choose to honor life in our everyday world, to monitor our own thoughts and our own actions, to use prayer, the power of mind, to use prayer, the science of mind, to commune with the forces of the cosmos, to choose a path through time that determines the course of our future history. Braden says that prayer may be the most sophisticated and empowering force to ever grace our world. He says prayer is concrete, measurable, and a directive force in creation. Prayer is not passive. When you pray, you're doing something. Through prayer, we can confine and redefine the foundation of negative thoughts and behaviors. Imagine the implications of applying the technology of prayer on a global scale. Churches all over the world are praying for world peace, but until they find peace in the church, we're going to lack the harmony and spirit to move the mountain of discord. Finding the strength to live in love in this world, when riches are valued more than spiritual understanding, is not an easy thing to do. But perhaps the most difficult of all is to think thoughts of the angels, to speak words of the angels, and to do as angels do. You see, the keys to achieving our desires are prayer, faith, and meditation. The only goal you need to set is the goal to rebuild your spiritual truth that lives inside you. You are the church. You are the mind, is your place of worship. Develop a consciousness based on spiritual law, which is the Christ mind. This requires us, as I often tell you, to become more like Jesus. When you become more like Jesus, you acquire the Christ mind. You're born from a marriage of love and wisdom. You're baptized in an understanding that God's will and the order to regulate our zeal. You've experienced a crucifixion that demonstrates your faith and your power to declare that you're free from all carnal desires. Your resurrection is evidence of the purifying strength that eliminates all things that hide our spirituality. Our ascension is proof that we have the ability to imagine ourselves in the rightful place, to declare the consciousness of Jesus as law of our eternal life. Accept by faith, proclaim by mouth, and demonstrate by your actions. When we accept the Christ consciousness, we become fully aware of what mind is. 1 Corinthians 2:19 through 16. It enlightens us on how the mortal must evolve into a spiritual place and space, as demonstrated by the crucifixion, to fully comprehend all of what mind is. 1 Corinthians 2:9 through 16 tells us this. It says, but it is written, the eye has not seen, the ear has not heard, and the heart of man has not conceived the things which God has prepared for those who love him. But God has revealed them to us by Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For what man knows, the mind of man, save the spirit of man which is in him. Even so, no one knows the mind of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit is from God, that we may understand the gifts that are given to us by God. For the things which we discuss are not dependent on the knowledge of words of man's wisdom, but on the teaching of the Spirit, thus explaining spiritual things to the spiritually minded. For the material man rejects spiritual things They are foolishness to him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But the spiritual man discerns everything, and yet no man can discern him. For who knows the mind of the Lord, that he may teach it? But we have the mind of Christ. Paul is telling us that thoughts of lower perceptions have no vision. They provide no direction. Our lesser ideas that enter our heart, that enter our subconscious, but we can't realize our blessings and await our recognition as long as we allow those negative conditions to enter our subconscious. But he says the mind of God is accessible through spiritual understanding and wisdom. That man knows his desires, but only the intellect of God within him can reveal spiritual understanding. He tells us we must look past our worldly consciousness and pursue a spiritual knowing that embraces the mind that God possesses. Our search evolves from professing material desires to proclaiming cosmic truth. Our mortal minds can't comprehend the mind of God, but we can be still long enough. Sometimes it's difficult to pray, but we must pray and have faith in the knowledge that that prayer will deliver the desired result. You see, without spiritual understanding, the mind of God appears to be far off, too far away for us to make the connection. But when we connect in spirit with that greater intelligence, we become totally aware of the law and how to use it. We accept the mind of Christ. We have a divine idea that we can share with others. We become part of one great mind that expresses itself through us as us. When we think totally and solely on its principles. Paul is telling us we must merge our human consciousness with the absolute. That we must harmonize our thoughts with the unlimited ideas of the Christ mind. He's informing us the only way to demonstrate the love of God is to understand the law of mind and how to use it. Mind is all that you were. Mind is all that you will ever become. Mind is all that you are. Mind is, and there is nothing else. God bless you and have a wonderful and blessed Sunday.